Welcome back, listeners, to the Inspired Writer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and today I have Michael Fedor joining me as our guest. He is a political thriller author, and he comes to this with 20 years of political organizing. So in his writing, he's combining tales of power, ambition, and the human condition, paired with the inner workings, the behind the scenes of Washington, D.C. And his thrillers have a futuristic element, which is super fun and very engaging. He's got 2 full books out as part of the Bull Moose series, but he also has a free prequel download called The Senate Deception, which provides a great teaser for any potential reader to get to know his writing, his characters. And it was this genius marketing aspect that really got me excited about talking to you, Michael, because that was not something I've really seen authors do. And having read it, it is so captivating and such a good way to be like, here's my voice, here are my characters. You're gonna want to know more about these people and more about their story. So I have a number of questions, but my initial one is like, why did you make that transition from living this life to kind of writing about it? And what made you do the prequel as an attention getter?
Well, Elizabeth, thanks for having me on. And you could do my intros anytime. That was fantastic. I'm so excited. I want to know who this guy is.
The right?
Right. So, I made the change because politics has changed quite a bit in 20 years that I was involved in it. And some of the people who I used to work with and for have since left the industry, have, left office. And I think things have generally become more polarized, more divided, a little more vitriolic, a lot more vitriolic, actually, to be honest. And I no longer felt the sense of personal reward that I was doing something good by putting the time and energy into that. I felt like it was perhaps the fight for someone else now to step up and into those shoes, and for even my own sanity. It just made sense for me to take a step back from campaign trail work and to do something else. But I still had all this experience and I had this itch to write. The itch to write actually began in my career when I was teaching 20 years ago in a classroom in central Pennsylvania where I taught English to high school students. It's when I began writing my first book, was 20 years ago, and it was terrible because I didn't know what I was doing. So I'll admit that. But so that's where I kind of began there as a teacher and a writer. And now I find myself going full circle, returning to that writing. And it's so satisfying to get something as completely horrendous and challenging and exciting and terrible as a book out into the world, which we could talk about that process. And so now to be able to share my stories. And listen, I was never a sea captain, so my books do not take place on a ship. I was never an astronaut, so my books are not about space travel, but I worked a lot around people who are pursuing and holding power. And so that is why it's a theme I chose to write about. And it's something that really, for me, there's a lot of really creative directions that those types of stories can go. And they can be about big things like the presidency, which is what the Bull Moose series is about. But they can also be about the very simple dynamics between a husband and wife, which is the book also explores as well. From people who are trying to pursue these positions of power, what are the implications and the impacts on their everyday lives? So why did I decide to write a prequel as a reader magnet and to use it as a way to introduce the characters to my readers? And so I would go back to the idea came from Thomas Umstattd Jr., who runs the novel marketing and author media. And, he talked to me about, think about the Avengers. You see the first, second, third Avengers movies. They're all talking about Budapest. And like, oh, this might be bad, but it's not as bad as Budapest. And you never saw what happened in Budapest, but everyone referred to it all the time. And he said, so that can be a really exciting way to go write your Budapest story. And it's not something that your reader has to know about, but you can entice them to want to learn about it by dropping these mentions. So throughout Bull Moose Book 1, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, there's all this talk about the Senate fight, the filibuster fight, why Piper lost his reelection, why he's retired to the woods and changing his career because he suffered this humiliating defeat after that really costly filibuster fight. And so that's what the Senate Deception's about, is what is that filibuster fight that they talk so much about. And for me, it's exciting. And I sometimes call it book 0, sometimes call it book 0.5.
Yeah.
But it is a prequel. It's not essential to read it in order to understand what's happening. And a lot of things are referred to in book 1 about the relationships and the dynamics between Piper and his allies, chief ally Ron Bender, and the president Russell Warner, and those dynamics are much different 5 years prior in the setting of the Senate Deception. So to me, it was really just a cool way to introduce people to the story and to also give them an on-ramp to the series, but also making it clear that they don't have to read that book in order to jump into book 1. Because while I'm running a sequential series for now, I do hope that after I get through book 3, the series is going to become more episodic. And so you'll simply be able to jump in and out of the book 1 or book 10 or book 5, because it'll just be following the events of this world I've created, where books 1, 2, and 3 are very sequential right now. And like what you really have to understand what's happened in book 1 to read book 2 and so forth. So that's
That
where the
makes
idea
sense.
came from, and I ran with it, and I felt like it really worked. And I was originally started to be a short story, and as you can already tell, my answer to this question, short story turned into a novella of 30,000 words, and so here we are.
I love that. How hard was that to kind of roll back those characters, those relationships? Would that something that you already knew as an author because of all the backstory that we know as the author writing a book, and so you just simply had to put words to the backstory and the character development that you had already created in your head? Or how much of that was like you having to really sit there and wrestle with, okay, what did get this character to this point? Or what did this relationship look like before, book 1? And I know you had told me that you actually ended up adding a character that you then had to write into book 1 because of this process of the prequel.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, because this book was just simply a political thriller. And it's what it was like. Draft 1 was sitting there, as actually probably draft 3 at that point, when I decided to take that step back and write the prequel, the novella. And in writing that, it just was, I'm a pantser, so I'm writing by the seat of my pants. I have a basic outline. It's a fight over reforming the Senate filibuster, and it takes place in the future. And so when I started going down that path, I suddenly discovered, I was writing this character, this digital assistant, because it's 2038, 2039 in the book. Digital assistant's way more advanced than ChatGPT or Siri or anything we have today. And suddenly this assistant became this character. And the moment where it clicked for me was in the story, Jackson Piper and Ron Bender are cramming late night trying to get this filibuster fight to work for their benefit. And they need to stay awake, and they need some food to fuel their energy. And their assistant, Ziggy, asks them, well, what can I get you? What can I order you? And they say, well, I can go for some Chinese food. Ziggy calls the local Chinese takeout place, and she orders in Mandarin. And I was like, that's it. That's when I suddenly understood the power of putting this book into the future, putting this futuristic science fiction edge into the story, because it could be a lot more fun for the reader to have these kind of things happen. And then this character, Ziggy, had so many more dimensions. It became a much more integral part of how Piper and Bender were going to succeed in reforming the Senate filibuster. And then when it came to bringing her forward into what it takes to kill a bull moose, she then became like Ron Bender's confidant. She then became his instrument for action. And after some of the events unfold, she becomes this common thread that pulls the book forward. And so as a writer, you have to be open to these aha moments, these light bulb moments where if you plan at all, you're going to miss that moment of creativity that just kind of lands on you. and then embrace it is my advice, because that's what happened to me. And so suddenly it made sense. I was writing about a future presidency, so why wouldn't I make this futuristic in terms of the story? Because how our lives are transforming so quickly now because of technology. Have some fun with it, make that into a character, and really see how it could take off. And I was a little afraid because I'm not a heavy science fiction reader. I'm a more of a political thriller reader, historical fiction reader. So that for me was a little bit of a risk, in trying to take this futuristic edge into my political thriller. And like, science fiction does not need one more subgenre, yet here I am writing one, which I'm calling polyfi, which is, political thriller science fiction. And I'm having some fun doing it, and finding out that there are other authors out there who are also exploring it as well. And this kind of takes threads from like Ray Bradbury, pulling forward a little bit Michael Crichton. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's some basis for this, and I feel like when you're a writer and you just open yourself up to those opportunities, some really exciting things can take place if your eyes are open for them.
I think there's so much genius to Ziggy's character. For one, she provides so much lightheartedness and comedic relief in what is already like a very tense like storyline. Because of the like skins or personality that she's, been assigned, and she does all this like cheeky stuff or whatever, like wears these outfits and just provide like a moment of levity in a really tense scene, which really I think helps as a reader. And also she just adds that little bit of like realistic magic, when like you need to make two things line up and you've got this condensed timeline and you need a miracle. She gets to be like the realistic miracle that we as the reader can buy into, of like, oh yeah, of course, she would have that power to do this, unhumanly, seemingly impossible thing in just the nick of time and have exactly the right resource, to keep this moving forward. Um, like the way I loved when she extrapolated, where the two key people would be that Ron Bender needed to have a conversation with ahead of the, Senate meeting. And she was like, oh, at this time, usually he's this, or this just clicked and he always buys this muffin here, whatever it was. Like
Yep.
her like AI capabilities gave away in a normally sort of unreasonable, far-fetched situation to be like, oh yeah, of course that they would be able to directly find the person they need to talk to in this 5-minute window and make that happen, and
Yeah.
it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, that's was the cool aspect. She became like a storytelling technique, and I love your reference too of like the comic relief, because like,
Mhm.
she, they're doing something in an office setting, so that she appears on screen dressed in professional attire. She's a digital image. It doesn't matter what she's wearing. She could be wearing a chicken costume, but she's taking it upon herself as this sentient AI to dress for the moment. And in What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, they go visit Jackson Piper in Colorado in October in the second chapter of the book, and she comes on screen dressed for the slopes of Vale. So it's like, Ziggy's having fun with her wardrobe, and she's also kind of like a wink and a nod to the audience, like, I'm playing along with this. And so I did have to like problem solve with her, and I'm trying to find a way to have the right balance in my writing between plausible reality, terrifyingly plausible plot lines, but also some fantastic things that have to happen to make it, interesting and good. It was Alfred Hitchcock who said like great stories are real life with the boring parts taken out. So take the boring parts out. If they had to search around the Capitol 3 hours to find this right senator, that would not work in a novel. So yes, Ziggy said, looked at his social media. He just took a picture on the Capitol steps. That's where you'll find him. And Senator so and so, he buys a muffin and has a meeting like in 98% of the time he's at his desk by this time each day. So you have a very high probability you'd find him there. That's also really powerful when you think about how our lives can be data sets going forward, and how that suddenly could become predictors of behavior and ways for AI to interact and anticipate not only our needs, but our locations. And there's some really interesting stuff there. Ziggy's also a little bit of a peek into Ron Bender's psyche at times.
Yes.
There gets into the
Mhm.
next story, like why she's named Ziggy. Some of that starts to become
Mm.
revealed. You don't really know where she came from in book one. In book two, you start to get maybe a couple more hints about her origin And I'm thinking that maybe her origin story is a future reader cookie, or it's a future kind of
Oh,
a
yeah.
2.5 or a 3.5. Again, you don't have to read it, but if you're interested in knowing where Ziggy came from, jump in and read that story.
She's my favorite character. I mean, I love a number of your characters, but she's my favorite for sure. Maybe because as a female, there's not a lot of female characters, to relate to. But I love her. I love her personality. I love her sense of humor. I just really enjoyed
Yeah, and
that.
this is still a very male-dominated world. It
Yes.
is the U.S. Senate is today. It will, I think, still be in 20 years, unfortunately. And so Ziggy is this. She's been given a gender by Ron, and you can explore that why as you explore Ron's character. He's somewhat of a hopeless, lonely, romantic type of guy,
Mhm.
with some maybe some tawdry history in his closet.
Potentially.
Yeah, but so she then gave way to help me find the courage to write female characters. I was having a hard time writing believable, effective female characters, and I was working with Thea Newell, my editor for book one, and she's like, just write what you know and write those relationships and make the women strong and make them, you know, let them drive scenes, let them drive beats, and you will find comfort that you, as a male writer, can write female characters just as strongly as you can write male ones. And so I had to let go of that fear, which a lot of writing is letting go of fear. And I think it was successful. I found suddenly I could write these very different female characters in Bull Moose book one, which I was not quite really ready to write when I was writing the Senate Deception, but it was a different story too. But
I love that. Yeah, I don't think that's something we talk about enough about the difficulty of writing from a different perspective like that. You know, I hear about it a little bit when you talk about the romance genre where it's a lot of female writers and they write these kind of in the eyes of the female gaze, idyllic male characters who are very forthcoming with their feelings and affectionate and know exactly when to, offer a solution to a problem and exactly when to just push you against a wall,
yep.
and it's not reality, but the readership loves it because it's really catered to them. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a real, challenge to be able to write from that perspective. So kudos to you for exploring that, and finding that. I have one more question about the writing, like the books and the content, but then I want to jump into a little bit more like behind the scenes of the process and gathering readership and stuff. So my last question is because you referenced earlier about the transition and changes and shifts to the political landscape in our reality and how it has become so much more polarized and vitriolic. Do you think that will be reflected in future books in the series, or is this your way to kind of provide an escape for readers from that reality?
Well, that's a great question, Elizabeth, and I think that's part of the challenge I've run into at this moment. Is I'm writing chilling political thriller at a time when reality is just as chilling for many people. And
Mhm.
so I've found some readers are just not emotionally available at this moment in time to read political thriller. And that's okay. I've told them it's okay to set my stuff aside, come back to it when you need that escape, when maybe things are not feeling so like the world is crashing down on you. Um, when I first wrote What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose 20 years ago, it was just called Bull Moose, and it was more of a polemic. So it was more like Ray Bradbury, like social commentary on the situation at hand, and it felt too much like a list of grievances, like a Festivus list of grievances. And so I decided that wasn't making the story fun to read. When I transformed it 20 years later to be more of a let's take current threads of where we are in the political landscape in America and then draw them out where they're going to go. That's where I think Bull Moose book one really becomes a bit of a warning sign. If you think political violence is bad now, imagine 20 years when, a citizen in the crowd can pull a gun on a candidate. And what does that look like? And how does the candidate react to that situation? Um,
Unfortunately, we saw that in the election cycle, right?
right, right. Or like, when there is, there's not only talk of political assassination, but it actually happens between these opposing forces. And how does the public react to that, and how does that push sentiment for or against candidates? I didn't intend to predict the future with this writing. Unfortunately, much of it is coming true in real time, and so that also is a little scary as a political thriller author. You don't want your work to come true to life, but it is, unfortunately. That's my real challenge, though, is how to write political thriller with threads of hope. And I have to lean back on Jackson and Valerie, his running mate in Bull Moose Book One, for those threads of hope, because they are very classic hero and heroine who don't have faults and don't have skeletons, and everyone keeps wondering, like, what is the secret that they have? They don't have these dark backgrounds. They are good people. They are the light fighting the darkness 20 years into the future. And I feel like, especially in book two, more of that hope comes through, even though things get even more perilous and get even more dangerous. I think there is a greater focus in on, here are political leaders who are going to risk everything and fight, and you would want to believe in it. They're not going to let you down because you suddenly discover that they're a cheater, or they're a liar, or that none of it's true. So I think that's what I'm hoping, um, my readers can get into these books and get excited about the world I've built, and see, yes, it's taking place with some very bad actors, but there are some very good people who you want to cheer for and get excited about, and they do find success. It's not always the success they thought, but they do find victories along the way that makes you feel good. It doesn't make you feel like, oh crap, the world is just this fictional world is just as terrible as the world I'm living in. Boy, what kind of escape is that? I really want people to feel like, they want to go read the book, because boy, in that world, policy does drive the day, or look, reform is possible, or the good women and the good guys can win, even when the odds are stacked against them. And so those are the things that I'm hoping my political thriller fiction can really attract people to want to read. And I think I originally was writing the series hoping to like write and release during an election year, when I thought everyone would want to read political thriller. It's turned out that no one really wants to read that at the moment because of how exciting the real world has been. Things have started to calm down now, and I think that in some regards, that would be the next opportunity, as people want to escape.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so now I want to jump into, you've referenced a little bit that you started this writing process 10 years ago, right? And then ended up, not feeling like it was a very good story. You've talked a little bit about the ways that you've changed it through your editing process. I'd love to hear and have you share a little bit of your insights with the audience about some of those key tools that you used as a writer. I know when you and I spoke individually, we talked about like a writer's group you were a part of, about how important the developmental edit you went through was in, tweaking your story, or even just getting validation that what you had was a strong framework. So will you share some of those kind of key elements that you feel helped you along in the writing process?
Absolutely. So when I started writing 20 years ago, is when I was teaching. Um, in my mind, I thought, boy, it would be exciting to be an author. And I knew I was a strong writer. And when I shared this creative work of fiction with a colleague at work, who I also believed to be a very strong writer and knew quality fiction, she was not as impressed as I hoped she would have been.
Mm.
Um, so that took my ego down a notch on, am I ready yet for publication? And I kind of set it aside and came back to it at various times for various reasons over the following 10 years. But it really wasn't until the election of 2016 where things in the book were coming true again. And I was like, oh crap, I'm onto something with this plot about a world in which people feel dissatisfied with all their choices, and they start to
Mhm.
retreat and pull away from politics all together. And then the bad people kind of come in and fill in the void. And I went back to her with a second draft, and it still was not, up to what I felt I could do and what I felt, you know, could land me a publishing deal. And so I put it aside again. But I discovered some really incredible people by joining some online writing communities. And shout out to the Order of the Oxford Comma, which is a writing group that I'm part of. And that gave me an opportunity to um, maybe not always share my writing for critique, but to admit my fear of why I was stuck to other writers who had a similar experience and could say to me, lean into that fear you feel right now, lean into that feeling of dread, like you don't know where the next page is going to go, and then having them say, hey, read this book, Plot and Structure, or read this book, the first 5 pages, or read, giving me um, resources on craft that became really, really important for me finding my way out of the mediocre writing that I felt like I was doing, and to write something that I would describe as more commercially viable. Because ultimately
Mhm.
that's my goal, to be a successful writer whose work sells. And so to do that, that means that certain conventions and certain structures and certain characters really need to exist within the genre I'm writing so that people will recognize it as political thriller and want to read it and read it from the beginning to the middle and to the end. And so when I was completely rewriting Bull Moose for the fourth, fifth, I don't know what time, I suddenly understood the importance of having an editor who's going to, work through chapter by chapter and give feedback, and how important that was. I did not know until I got into this and committed to professional writing. The role of a developmental editor is so critical in that first, second, third draft, in being able to sit you down and saying, this works, this doesn't work. I don't see where this is going. This character doesn't seem to have a role. You should just eliminate them. So that's where then you can take 180,000 word work and get it down to 100,000 words and be publishable. Is because you've got a smart developmental editor who's taking a look at how the story can work and not work. And Thea's feedback was spot on. A couple things that she gave early on that was important, and some others in my writing group gave me, was first, the stakes were not clear at the beginning of the Senate deception or in Bull Moose 1. What were the stakes for Jackson Piper if he failed? So that's where I had to really sit down and bring the stakes right front and center into the first, second, or third chapter, so it was clear to the reader, if he doesn't go on this journey, what would be the cost for him and what would be the cost for the world in which he's operating. And then there was also some feedback on the relationships, the dynamics between characters, that the reader had to get a little bit more invested in Jackson earlier on. And as a politician, I wasn't doing enough to show what he's like when he's not giving a speech or not contemplating the next political move. So I had him making breakfast with his kids. And that was a suggestion by Thea to show the human side of this individual by showing how he interacts with these two children. It lets them kind of build waffle towers out of whipped cream and fruit. And it's just a playful thing that shows he is a human that you would really want to know and be part of. And so I think those are the things that, like, when you're a writer and you're just trying to tell your story, I think you can get stuck on, is it moving fast enough? Those types of things. Um, do I have the plots all lines all lined up? Have I got the facts straight? It's when you have a second person involved in your writing who can give you that feedback about what's working, what's not, that really can unlock its potential. And I got to tell you that when I decided to do this, to get back on the path to publishing, I was terrified that it still wasn't good enough. And when I gave my first draft to my developmental editor, there was this long silence of like a week where I didn't hear a word. In my head, I was convinced she thought it was horrible. She'd read the first chapter and was just spending the next 6 days trying to figure out how to tell me to quit. So that ended up not being the case, but I think that every writer has that experience, especially in writing their first work, even their second work. It's how you can, the talk track in your own head can undermine you and can pull you away from really reaching for something you love and want to do by convincing you you're not good enough. And this also is not just in writing. People do this every day in their lives, in their marriages, in their work. And it's like if you can silence the voices of insecurity and doubt in your head and turn up the volume on the voices of surety and confidence and belief and hope, then for every voice in your head that says you can't and you're not good enough, there's a voice in there that can also say, this is good, this is great, you can do this. And thankfully, when she came back with her edits, she said, look, you are a talented writer and you have what it takes, I believe, to be commercially viable in this genre. And you have what it takes to push the story forward. Thriller has to do. It has to catapult chapter to chapter, so they want to keep reading, and the next cliffhanger emerges as the chapters end. She's like, that's all there. Let's just talk about these little elements we need to see to bring these characters into clearer focus for the reader. And that was just so powerful for me, and I'm so grateful for that feedback.
I love that you highlighted too, like that piece of personal development that, yes, we may use our writing as the way to confront those, like the imposter syndrome or that doubt or whatever, but it does have an impact on all the other areas of our life, right? When we are willing to put ourselves out there and be more vulnerable by whether we're putting out a fictional character that, we feel some connection to, or just our writing open for critique, or whether you're writing a memoir or anything even more personal writing that's more nonfiction based. Like, as you face those fears and push through those fears, like, that personal development doesn't just serve you in your writing, it serves so many other areas of your life. And I'm so glad that you highlighted that, because I know that's something that Stephanie and I talk about a lot on this podcast is, just the impact that even going through the process of writing has had on us, as individuals, regardless of publication, regardless if anyone reads it, regardless of, a particular outcome, just to having pushed yourself through that process that, required diligence and discipline of sitting down to write those pages, knowing that it might all be garbage that gets cut in the end anyways, but you're still going to show up for yourself. Yeah, I think that's been a huge piece and something that I continue to preach to everyone about, regardless of what the outcome is, whether you eventually publish it or not, even just going through the process is you gain so many gems throughout that it's worth the endeavor. It's worth the struggle. I wonder if you'll share just a little bit before we wrap up this episode about your relationship with social media and how you have navigated that as an author, because I think you have, at least for me, an interesting perspective that I haven't heard from other people yet.
Yeah, boy. So, and I come at this from the political world. And I think this is also something that impacted my writing early on till I could let go of it. I operated in a world where everything I said and did had to have an image to it. It was selling an image. It was selling an image of perfection or of likability, because voters don't vote for candidates they don't like or can't relate to. So you don't, when you're a politician or working in politics, you don't post your Saturday morning just crawled out of bed in your pajamas photos, because that's the
How funny would
imperfection,
that be?
right? Like, and then people judging you, like, oh, look, he wears SpongeBob SquarePants pajamas or something. So when I came at this as an author, it was first letting go of the fear of only presenting the perfect image, and I think I'm still working through that. Um, and I think I also found that my intention to use social media became a more humanistic, more real version. And I think it's a healthier version for all of us than to just feel compelled to post the perfect all the time. But as an author, I've not found much success in using social media to find my readers, um, with the exception of maybe Instagram to some extent. But I think it's still an inch deep there. And certainly Meta has not been very successful for me organically. Um, on a paid perspective, yes, going down the path of paying for ads to present my works to folks who then can click the ads and then come to my shop and potentially buy. It absolutely is essential and remains essential for independent authors to use Amazon advertising and Facebook meta advertising to reach folks. But I found that more successfully for me in converting folks to become readers has been capturing email addresses and working to find folks through giveaways and promotions on a lot of really great sites that are out there, like Book Sweeps and Book Funnel and Story Origin app and Storygraph and some others and Goodreads. Going to where readers are and sharing the opportunity for a free or discounted work with those folks with an invitation to say, if you take a risk by giving me your email address, I'll give you the risk of giving you something for free and that you may or may not read ever, or maybe you will and don't like, but I'm going to give it to you. And if you love it, then the hook is that I want you to come back. I want you to stay on my list and I want you to be excited to read the next thing and to look for the next opportunity.
Are you giving them your prequel, or are you giving them book one, or does it just depend?
It does depend. I think that if what I've found is if you commit to only giving them one thing forever, then you start to kind of, it's not the shiny new thing anymore. Even if there are 40,000 people or 100,000 people in that universe, that 10% or 1% that's actually going to click through and look at your stuff, if they see the same Senate deception all the time, then I think it does get boring. And I've worked on so many of these giveaways now. I see some of the same reader magnets being given away, and I can kind of, if I see a promotion come up, I can anticipate which authors' reader magnets I'm potentially going to see. So I also created, I think is very a smart strategy as a writer, is to do some preview work of your works. So the first 5 chapters of Bull Moose Book 1, I created a promo book of that. Tree of Liberty, my new work that just came out in November. I also created a preview of that. The first, I think, 9 chapters. It's like part 1 of the book. And sure, I'm giving away a lot of content, but I'm giving it in good faith. I'm giving it away in the sense that, like, no one wants to read a tenth of a book. So if you read that tenth of the book and you love it, I'm hoping that you will take the risk of the $8.99 or whatever and buy the whole book and finish the story. And so some giveaways require only full content. So you have to be aware of that. If you're going to be in these promotions, you have to have a short story or you have to have a novella. They don't want excerpts. Others will encourage excerpts, and others will encourage, sales pages, landing pages that be part of the promotion. So when you're going down this path as a writer, you have to have all these tools in your tool belt and be ready for them. That means putting in the work behind the scenes to have good links for various reader cookies, whether they're a full work like my novella or an excerpt work like my segments of book 1 and book 2, as well as your sales landing pages. But at the end of the day, if I'm confronted with I've got 5 minutes to spend, what am I going to do? I'm probably going to email my list. I'm going to write a cute email to my list for, hey, here's what I'm up to, my quote of the week. I'd spend 5 minutes on that before I'd spend my 5 minutes on my Instagram story or my Facebook post, because I just do not see that it results in as much engagement as landing in someone's inbox. And as long as you're doing email in an authentic way, that's not a real like salesy way, then I do think you can find much more success building your readership that way than figuring out like what's the next photo I'm going to post on Instagram, because it just is not. And I think it's also my genre. Political thrillers are a little harder than romance to land and get this huge following on Instagram. And so I think it's also genre specific.
Absolutely. And you've got a special offer for our listeners today. So will you share a little bit about that? What do you
Yeah.
have for us?
Yeah. So we're going to use the code INSPIRED for this great show. If you go into my shop, michaelfedorbooks.com, and that code's going to get you 60% off. And I'm going to give you either 60% off What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, or 60% off Tree of Liberty, or 60% off both. So it's up to you. But I really want to encourage folks who've made it to this point in the show and love what you're doing, Elizabeth, to continue to support you and Steph, and make this a great show, and support writers like me. And so the easiest thing I can do is just give back, give you a discount. So 60% off, michaelfedorbooks.com. Use the code INSPIRED and at checkout, and you'll get a great discount and get some great books. And I'm going to put that across audiobook, ebook, as well as print.
That's so generous. And I know we're going to have listeners that are going to be excited to take advantage of that. I think you said this will run for about 2 weeks from the initial post of this episode. So don't delay, take advantage. Also, you can get access to Michael's prequel by going to his website and giving him your email address. So that you can get that Senate deception backstory that we've been talking about throughout this episode. I am so excited to have had you here on the podcast today. I'm so grateful for your insights and the ways that you've processed your writing journey, and encouraging others to do the same with these little nuggets of wisdom. Just thank you so much for being here. We're so lucky to have these insights and inspiration to travel into our weeks as we sit back at the computer following the holiday break, and start to work on our works in progress again.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. Well, thank you for this show. And what you're doing is so important with the website and this podcast for writers like us. And I think building community among writers is so essential for what can be a very lonely profession. And so to help people find one another, right? Plumbers drive around with signs on their vans, plumber, so you know how to find them. But writers don't drive around with signs on their cars that say writer. It's harder to find one another. So shows like this help us find one another. And I really encourage folks to reach out to me and to other writers and to come together, because we need one another, and we're all doing incredible stuff. And it's just so rewarding to have folks like you who will help us lift up our voices and share our stories. So thank you.
Oh, we're happy to be that place. Happy listening, everyone.